Welcome to episode 213 of Angela Watson's Truth for Teachers. I'm your host, Angela Watson, and I'm here to speak life, encouragement, and truth into the minds and hearts of educators and get you energized for the week ahead. Today, I'm going to share the breaking point that led to my sabbatical and how I'm doing now. Visit truthforteachers.com to get the transcript or find our Truth for Teachers podcast community on Facebook. In lieu of a typical message from our sponsors this week, I wanted to share about some products of my own that you might not realize that I offer. Did you know that I've published 5 books, 5 courses, and have 70 downloadable printable resources for teachers? It has been a long labor of love. I started creating these materials in 2008, and I have built a steady collection of materials over time, tackling topics like productivity, enjoying teaching, mindset, and classroom management. The printable and downloadable resources include growth mindset and working memory activities, a report card comment system designed to take half the time of your current process, feedback comments for student writing, and more. The most recent addition is emergency subplans for every grade level K-12. I co-created these with a team of practicing classroom teachers to produce high-quality, rigorous activities that students can do when you're absent. So those are some of the printables. In terms of courses, I have the 40-Hour Teacher Workweek Club, of course, but I also have Finally Free, which is an audio collection designed to address teacher anxiety. And I have the Fewer Things Better project, which can help you figure out how to eliminate, automate, and delegate your workload. To learn about any of these resources or to discover what else I've created, just go to my website, which is thecornerstoneforteachers.com. In the navigation menu, you will find links to my books, my printables, and my courses. Thank you for supporting my work. Each purchase helps make it possible for the many, many free materials that I offer, like this podcast, to be available to educators everywhere at no cost. So this episode is going to be a personal episode. If you are new around here and you're looking for teaching ideas, this is probably not the place for you to start. I'm going to talk about the sabbatical that I took in December, why I took it, my breaking point that was leading up to it, and sort of the aftermath of it now. So I'll give you a quick summary of what happened over the last couple of months in case you're new here or if you just have other more pressing things to remember than what Angela Watson has been up to. The spring and summer of 2020 were some of the darkest times of my life, both personally and professionally. And I'll talk about what was going on professionally in a moment. In terms of the personal stuff, when I first was planning this episode, I was going to recap just some of the trials and the hardships that my family and I have experienced since March. But you know what? A lot of it I've already shared, and it's sort of irrelevant. I don't really need to prove or justify my need for a break. 2020 was a tough year on everybody. And for many people, it was far worse than it was for me. Y'all know that. And also, those of you who are trying to manage depression and anxiety, recognize that those lows can come even if everything in your life is going great. Circumstances are really kind of secondary. And I think that's probably the crux of it for me. The truth is, I was having more low days than functional days by July and August of 2020. I was having more trouble than ever just getting out of bed, and doing any kind of work required Herculean levels of focus and energy. When I stayed home, I felt depressed. But when I left the house, I felt anxious. And this was not just because of COVID. It was worse because of COVID, but it's something that I've grappled with off and on for years in varying degrees. Just like, just the racing mind and trying to plan everything out, control everything, anticipate all the potential problems, anytime that I'm going out or doing anything or traveling. But being at home is just, from being at home, it can be depressing when you never leave the house. So I was hitting a bit of a breaking point there, and as I shared in episode 211 when I was announcing my sabbatical, I started taking Zoloft in August, and that really helped turn things around. I had been on similar medications years ago, but I went off under doctor supervision when I was trying to get pregnant. Spoiler alert, we did not get pregnant and we are no longer trying, as I am now 42. But it hadn't occurred to me until this past summer that antidepressants and anti-anxiety medications were once again an option for me. It had just been off the table for so long that I just kind of forgot about it. My understanding now, by the way, is that many of these meds have been approved for women who are trying to conceive. So as an aside, if you are struggling with your mental health, do talk to a doctor about your options, even if you are trying to get pregnant. I remember the exact moment that I realized I needed to be on medication and there was just no other alternative. It was a beautiful, warm August day in 2020. The birds were outside singing, and I was slicing tomatoes for my lunch. And I was thinking to myself, this is all so pointless. Why am I even doing this? Making this lunch? I'm just going to have to do it again tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. The drudgery just never ends. Why even bother? And it was not a new feeling for me to feel that way. And at that moment, I was just completely fed up. I was tired of waking up every single day, feeling like everything was pointless and boring and just not even wanting to get up at all. I was tired of getting maybe 2 good days a week in which I could actually function and get things done, and then being exhausted from having to cram so many tasks into those 2 good days to compensate for laying in bed the other 5. And I just decided, right there at the kitchen counter with a tomato in my hand, that I was going to do a telemedicine appointment with some psychiatrist online, didn't know who, didn't care. I was going to start medication that day. And I did. I found an app called K-Health. I connected with a doctor. It was like $19, like for some sort of like monthly subscription or something. And I had that bottle of generic Zoloft for $1 in my hand that evening. Now, I just realized this sounds a little bit like a paid product placement or an infomercial. It is not. But that's what I did. And I could not believe it was that easy. I was sort of in awe that I had let myself get so accustomed to depression over the years that I hadn't done this earlier. And I thought, well, this is just going to be the beginning. It will probably take a few months to find just the right medicine or the right dosage or the right combination of meds to help me feel better, because I've been through this in the past. But I mean, within really just a few days, I was feeling better. And about a week later, I was standing again in the kitchen slicing tomatoes for my lunch. It was August. What can I say? We have like really good fresh tomatoes in August. And I remember thinking to myself, look at this big, juicy red tomato. God, I love summer vegetables. This is incredible. The taste, the smell of this tomato that I get to have on my sandwich. And I realized that nothing in my circumstances had changed. I was still in a pandemic, still going through the mundane task of making lunch every day. But that person who can find delight in the small things in life, that person who enjoys simple pleasures and is content in her day-to-day life, that's the person I really am. And that person was clearly back because I was in awe of this wonderful tomato that felt like such a privilege to be able to eat. So if there are no other gifts to be found in this pandemic for me personally, and I can actually name a whole lot more, COVID at least gave me the gift of breaking me down so much emotionally that I went back on medication, and my life is just so much better now. My lows are not nearly as low now, and I feel peaceful and content the vast majority of the time. I feel like I've got the mindset tools, and now I also am like sort of rebalanced chemically, and it's a really, really good feeling. However, it took about a month to adjust to the medication and work through the side effects. And the Zoloft kind of zapped my motivation. I don't really notice any side effects now, but I do realize that a lot of my motivation to work before was anxiety driven. And without the anxiety, I was just not motivated to be productive. So that was a huge adjustment period for me this fall, learning who I am without a chemical imbalance and what I want to spend my time doing if it's not working. Like if I'm not doing work, what else do I want to be doing? Because in addition to the sort of mental, emotional breaking point, I was also hitting a breaking point professionally. Now, I have experienced professional burnout before, several times actually, and I talked about that way back in season 3, episode 4. It was about quitting my teaching job twice. But it had been many years since I felt burned out. It's probably been close to a decade since I felt burned out professionally. So that was another crisis coming to head this summer, in addition to COVID and our family stuff and health issues and the death of my mother-in-law, my husband being out of work, my depression worsening. It was a lot going on. And on top of that, I was also experiencing severe professional burnout. When I say that I have spent every day of my adult life thinking about teaching and learning, even on vacation, I really mean it. I remember as a teacher checking out stacks of professional development books from the library and then reading them poolside in the summer. That was my summer vacation, and creating new activities to do with my students. And even after I left the classroom and I started doing instructional coaching, teaching was still my hobby. I kept spending my evenings making games and activities because what else do people do while they watch TV? I just gave the materials to the teachers that I was coaching, and I shared them on my blog or I put them on TPT. It became part of how I made a living and supported my family. But making curriculum resources and activities and lessons still felt like a hobby. I could spend hours and hours a day on it and loved every minute of it. I attended dozens of education conferences over the past 10 years. I have spent my free time socializing with other educators and participating in Twitter chats and Facebook groups about teaching. So much of my free time involved doing things related to K-12 ed that I really, really enjoyed. And over the past few years, I felt a small tug away from that. And I'm sure that longtime listeners of the podcast can feel that a little bit because my podcast topics have ventured further and further away from the nitty-gritty of instruction and much more into mindset and well-being and being intentional with your time and living a full, meaningful, balanced life. Like my focus became more broad, I guess. So I'd been going in that direction anyway, where I knew there were other things that I was meant to do besides just focusing on classroom practices. But I just wasn't sure what it was because I never really had a hobby that wasn't education related. I mean, I have other things that I like to do and I don't work all the time. But stuff related to teaching was my main go-to. There was a lot of stuff that I did just for fun, teaching as hobby. And I was feeling that enthusiasm decline slowly over the last couple of years. And then COVID hit, and that hastened the demise of my enthusiasm. Because suddenly, literally overnight, teaching had become a source of stress and frustration and exhaustion to a level that most of us have never really experienced before. Morale within the profession has obviously been on a decline as teachers' autonomy and ability to be creative has decreased, and as participating in the educational system seems to require more moral compromise. You're having to give in on things that we know are not best for teachers and kids. So, it's been a slow, steady decline for a lot of people, I think. But when COVID hit, this was no longer teaching at all. What we were calling school was nothing that I recognized. It was nothing any of us had been trained for or prepared for or saw as a way to do the kinds of best practices that we know our kids benefit from. And it was no longer fun to work on teaching things. Not this past spring. Not for me, not for most of you, I think. This past spring was frustrating and confusing and working so much for so little impact. So what do you do when the main thing that you like to do in your free time is tied to a profession that has completely changed and had almost all the joy completely sucked out of it? Interacting with teachers was no longer something fun for me, where I could gather with like-minded folks and talk about things we're passionate about and geek out on pedagogy and organization and time management. Everything to do with schools just felt really depressing and overwhelming and upsetting. And when I lost that passion for education last spring, I felt like I lost a part of myself. And I know I'm not the only one because I have heard from so many of you who feel like you are, burned out's not quite the word. It's more like disillusioned. It's disillusionment, like suddenly doing a job that you don't recognize anymore, that you never signed up to do, that you're not trained to do, that you're not able to do well, but suddenly it's become your whole life and everything revolves around it. So to be completely transparent, in the summer of 2020, I felt like I had lost sight of what I am doing in this field. I had a lot of professional moments, like that time I was slicing tomatoes in my kitchen, where it's like, what is the purpose of this? Why bother? Why am I making lunch? What's it all for? I was having a lot of moments like that professionally. And during that time, the July 2020 cohort of the 40-Hour Teacher Workweek program was kicking off. Now, if you're not familiar, this is a year-long PD that I run, which begins every summer. It's 12 months, so there's really no end to it. For me, right? Because as soon as one cohort graduates, the next one comes immediately in with no break. So I had already planned to completely revamp the program anyways, because it's now 5 years old and I wanted to do a major update. So when COVID hit and I realized that teaching was going to look very different, I was prepared to adjust the program for that. And my team and I worked really hard all spring and summer, doing everything we could to give teachers answers when their school districts were not giving them any answers. But the whole time, and 40-hour members know this, I was really hoping school would be back to, quote, normal by fall 2020 in the US, as it had been in many other countries. I was creating resources for virtual and hybrid teaching to help teachers manage the workload, but I was hoping I wouldn't have to do it much longer. I was hoping schools could just delay their start dates a few weeks, we'd get our community transmission levels under control, and those nightmare scenarios of emergency pandemic teaching would be behind us. But by the time mid-July rolled around, COVID cases were rising in the U.S. exponentially, and it was clear that what I was hoping for, and what I think all of us were hoping for, really, was just not going to happen. And there were no good solutions. There just weren't. There was no path forward for schools this summer that when I looked ahead to the fall, I felt like, yes, this is good for teachers, this is good for kids. And when I heard this new brilliant idea of forcing teachers to teach in unsafe classrooms while simultaneously teaching students at home who were watching via live video, it just stunned me. I could not believe that anyone would ever think that this was an effective way for kids to learn or an appropriate expectation of teachers without paying them a substantial amount more. Concurrent hybrid learning was, to me, a new low in our profession at a time when I didn't think the expectations on teachers could get any more outrageous. And like many, if not most, if not all, leaders in the education space this past summer, I was really struggling to have a clear, comprehensive vision for the future of teaching and learning. Again, there were just no options that I felt good about promoting. One thing to understand about me is that I am a person who is completely motivated by the why. If I don't understand the importance of doing something, if it doesn't make sense to me, then I have no motivation to get it done. That's just my personality type. I don't do anything just because other people are doing it, just because someone told me to, just because it's always been done that way. There needs to be a clear and compelling reason for me personally, or else I just don't want to do it. And as someone that others look to for leadership, I have to have a really clear why, a really clear vision of where I want people following me to, right? Like, where am I leading them? And I'll have more to say about that whole minefield in a moment, because I discovered when I announced my sabbatical that some folks have put me up on some kind of pedestal that I really, really do not want to be on. So I feel like I was doing well in the spring when we were still in emergency pandemic teaching. I'm really proud of the podcast episodes that I did at that time and the support that I offered to teachers. But by mid-July, when I realized that schools were going to try to get back to normal standards for the following school year, like nothing had changed, I felt like the child-centered, grace-filled, humanity-first train that I was aboard had become derailed. And I wasn't sure yet which of the other tracks I wanted to put my train on. I did not like any of the possible destinations. I had people looking to me for leadership and guidance, and I was not willing to lead them to a place that I was not confident about going. It's like my train had been going full speed ahead, but I was no longer connected to the destination. This past summer, I felt like I just wasn't clear on where we were going or why or who was even with me. And so I felt a responsibility to stop and look at the map and figure out where it is that I'm trying to go so I can get myself back on the right track and then invite along the people who want to be on board for that destination. That's what the purpose of my sabbatical was. It was a chance for me to not just take a break from work, but to take a break from leading and to uncover a vision for the future of my work. There was no other option for me. If I didn't take that time to regroup, I was never going to get myself in the headspace that teachers need me to be. I'm not an employee of any company, so I don't get any vacation time. I have no sick days. I have no holiday leave. I have no summer break. Summer is actually the busiest time of year for me because of 40 hour. And just, PD requests are a lot. It's just a lot going on in the summer as people gear up for the new school year. So since I work for myself, if I don't choose to take time off, then I would just work 365 days a year. So for a long time now, I've had to self-select my time off. And this past fall, I knew it was going to have to be a longer period of time. I already split the podcast into 2 seasons. So there's normally a break in November and December, and then a break in June and July. And usually I can have like 20 new podcast episodes outlined before the next season even starts. Because when I'm on that break, there's so much I want to talk about. And I just get so inspired basically from having that break. But this time in August, when I took the summer break from the podcast, I came back. I'm like, I don't know what to say to these teachers. Like, I'm just grasping at straws here. I'm doing the best I can. But it was so hard to figure out, like, what was I going to say? And as the season went on, like, I felt good about the episodes I was doing, but I'm like, I've said everything I got to say at this point. Like, this is just a dumpster fire. I just don't have it in me with, like, as I shared, everything else going on, right? Like, at the same time, I'm like in these depressive episodes and, trying to be inspiring and encouraging and motivating to other people when you yourself can't get out of bed is very hard. So I basically cut out any tasks that weren't absolutely required. So anything that I didn't absolutely have to do for work, I'm not doing it. Like, I don't have to do the podcast. I don't have to send a weekly email. Just like take a little of a break from that. And then I worked ahead in October and November on everything that was necessary, everything that I couldn't intentionally drop the ball on, so that I could get it all done before December. And then I spent as much time offline in December as I possibly could. And that worked out okay because, like I said, the Zoloft, I was doing pretty good really by September. So I was able to spend September, October, November kind of working ahead so I could be offline in December. And I ended up being able to stay offline in December like 99% of the time, especially in the second half of the month once schools were closed for the holidays, because most other people were not thinking about work either. Like, the email dries up, like, people really aren't thinking about me. They're doing their own thing with their families. They're enjoying their vacations. So when I announced this time off via email in my podcast, I also told 40-hour members and graduates so that they would know nothing in the program would be affected. I was just going to batch everything. I was going to work ahead and get all of their December and January materials ready. And then the rest of the 40-hour team would keep everything running smoothly while I was offline. So I reassured the 40-hour folks, hey, this isn't changing anything for you all. And then I announced via email my podcast I was taking the sabbatical. And in response, I received over 1,500 emails, DMs, and private messages of support. And I think I replied personally to every one of them. If you reached out and I didn't reply, I'm so sorry. I really did try to get to every single one because they were so incredibly kind. It took me like a whole week to get back to everybody, but I was so touched by the number of you who supported me and encouraged me, prayed for me and thought about me. And it was just really, really touching. So I'm starting to go through all of these emails, right? It's taking me hours and hours and hours. I'm going through all of them. And like right around email 200, maybe 300, I was really surprised to see some pushback because I was just going through. And like I said, everybody had been so kind. And as I kept going on, I realized that email was not the only one. And my personal philosophy to feedback or criticism is that if one person says it, there's probably 20 or 30 other people who thought it but didn't bother to tell me, or felt like it would be rude to say something and just kind of like moved on with their life. But generally, especially if more than one person says something, I assume that there's at least a small contingent of people feeling the same way. So there were a handful of messages, maybe 6 or 7 people, in contrast with the 1,500 supportive messages. So it's a small amount. But there were some people who, as it turned out, were big mad about my choice to take a sabbatical. And I was completely unprepared for people to question that decision because, first of all, it is an extremely personal decision. And people who only know me through the internet do not have the context needed to make a judgment about whether or not I should be taking time off or how it should happen. It takes a lot of nerve to email someone who doesn't know you and try to shame them for taking a break from podcasting or sending a weekly email to a list. I mean, the way I'm thinking about it is like, I'm not a brain surgeon. I'm not like bailing out on people's scheduled life-saving surgeries here, friends. Like, I'm really not that important that people can't live without my online monologues for a couple of weeks. So that's what I'm thinking. But there were people who were frankly outraged that I dared to take a break when classroom teachers can't. And I mean, I understand. I do understand that frustration. And it's sort of true, even though teachers do have a good portion of the December off, the same as me. That's kind of why I picked that month, actually. I thought it would be good because most people are not thinking about work. But the vitriol, the nastiness in some of those messages was like, I can laugh about it now, but it was really shocking. And unfortunately, I've not been able to shake some of those words from my head. I mean, I had people tell me they didn't want to hear about my, quote, pity party. They had lost all respect for me. 17 years of me doing this work online, by the way. I take 1 month off. They've lost all respect for me. I had people say it was the most unprofessional thing they'd ever heard. I had people tell me I should never admit that I'm tired or burned out. I had people tell me not to expect anyone in my audience to still be here when I came back. And that hurt. That hurt deeply because I had confused followers with friends. And the response to the criticism, even though there was not a lot of it, really reinforced my decision to go offline. Because frankly, there are some folks out there who don't seem to realize that I'm an actual human being, and I really need everyone to see me as an actual human being. I don't exist solely to be a role model for teachers, not any more than you exist solely to be a role model for students. We are all allowed to fall short and disappoint and do less. But more than that, I feel like people presumably follow me because they appreciate my relentless emphasis on self-care and work-life balance and breaking free from people-pleasing and doing things just to avoid disappointing others. I mean, those are not just things that I say. I actually live that. I actually try to do all the things I tell you to do. And I refuse to martyr myself for this profession. This is actually not the first time that I've had to step away from work. During my 3rd year of teaching, I had a major depressive episode where there was basically nothing wrong in my life. Everything was okay, but I could not stop crying and I couldn't get out of bed. And I was so weepy all the time, and it took so much out of me to put on a happy face for my pre-K students that my doctor suggested a medical leave of absence. So I had a substitute cover my class. She was a good friend. She kept me in the loop about my little ones, and she sent messages to them from me frequently. She covered my class for about 6 weeks in the middle of the school year while I healed and I recovered. And then I returned. And that incident was actually the impetus for me to start sharing my teaching resources online. Because when I came back, my principal said to me, I couldn't even tell you were gone. The kids knew exactly what to do. They kept up all the routines you taught them. And I realized through that experience that there was something about the way I'd structured my classroom to be self-running that was unique, that the kids didn't need me there in order to keep learning. And that's when I started offering support to other teachers. I would start going on to like online message board forums and things like that to help other teachers create effective routines and procedures, just sharing what worked in my classroom basically and helping other people. So that experience of having to like step away from teaching for 6 weeks in the middle of the year because frankly I could not handle it was not the end of my career. It was not a failure. It was actually a stepping stone to the next part of my career. So I never have and never will see it as a weakness or a betrayal to take a break or to quit or to walk away temporarily or permanently from an obligation in order to prioritize your own mental health and well-being. I just don't see it that way. My sabbatical in December 2020 was, that's a pretty simple choice given that I don't have students depending on me. But as I just shared, even when I did have kids depending on me, I don't see myself as so important that other people can't possibly go on without me. If teachers are overworked and exhausted and burning out, it does not help them for me to be overworked and exhausted and burned out too. I got to take care of myself. So it truly had not occurred to me that any of you who heard my sabbatical announcement would be hurt or disappointed or mad about it. And for that, I apologize. That's something I could have been more sensitive to. A lot of teachers are drowning right now and looking for any kind of support, any voice of reason. I understand that. And I know also that it's hard to hear that someone else is taking a break when you yourself can't take a break. And I don't think that I worded that email about my sabbatical well enough to convey it. The podcast, I feel like, was better because, again, you get to hear my voice and it's much longer. But this short little email, I think it was too flippant. I just wasn't doing well at that time, frankly. I was just not in a good headspace. I didn't have the mental bandwidth or the energy to put forward the necessary effort into communicating carefully enough with my audience. My words were not clear and compassionate enough. Hence, I was stepping away. That was the whole point. I knew I couldn't do this job very well. And that was the whole point of the sabbatical. So if I botched that first announcement of the sabbatical for you and I made you feel some kind of way about it, I am so sorry for that. And I am apologizing specifically to the people who did not rail on me and call me names and tell me what an awful person I am. But those of you who just kind of read it and just were sad and disappointed and didn't understand, I am sorry about that. I just was not careful enough with my words. And moving forward, I would ask that we focus together on bringing the humanity back to how we interact with each other. Workers are not machines. We are all human beings. We all have real needs and real feelings. And that is frequently not honored for teachers. You deserve to be treated like a human. And I always want to extend that compassion to teachers, that permission to be a full person, not just a professional at all times. And I really, really thank those of you who have extended that same consideration back to me, because I think it's the only way forward. We're in a new era right now, and I think we have to be people-centered. We have to think about people's humanity and let them be full humans. I think we have an obligation to make sure also that we are healthy and strong so that we can be there for the people who are depending on us. Everything cannot be about, the children all the time. Do it for the children. You matter too. I matter too. Self-care for any of us is not selfish. And I know from all of those messages that the vast majority of you saw my sabbatical as an act of leading by example. A lot of people use that phrase. Tons and tons of you use that phrase. Thank you for leading by example. Practicing what I preach. That's another phrase that I heard a lot. Thank you for practicing what you preach. And I know for many others of you, it was an inspiration for you to carve out your own break from work over the holidays, that you saw someone else modeling how to do this and you decided to do it too. That was the intent that I had. I'm glad that it had that impact on the majority of you, because that really is what I wanted for people, was to feel like this is how it's done. It's deciding I don't have to work on these specific days, and so I'm going to choose to take a break. And given that you all had that time off at the end of December, my hope was that a lot of teachers would choose to do the same thing, at least a couple days over the break, to just not even think about work. And it made me so happy to hear that so many of you did that. I think moving forward, I will probably do something similar again for, if not the whole month of December, at least the second half of it moving forward. And next time around, not only am I going to explain it more clearly, because hopefully I'll be in the same positive headspace that I'm at right now, not completely burned out, and really invite you into the process, really invite you to carve out your own time and create community around this, where we're discussing what are we going to do with this time, what are we learning during this time, and really kind of make it something that we do together as a community in Truth for Teachers, in 40 Hour, in People in My Fewer Things Better book club, something that is like a regular practice in our life, where we are regularly taking that time where we intentionally are not working and not thinking about working over those winter holidays as the year comes to a close. Because that break is really essential to reimagining education. And you might be rolling your eyes at that word at this point because it's so overused to the point where it's meaningless. Everybody's talking about reimagining education since COVID. But when I talk about it, when I say reimagining our systems, reimagining our society, reimagining our world, that's not hyperbole. I actually mean it. I actually spend large amounts of time, quote, freedom dreaming about what it would look like for students to be liberated in their education, for teachers to be free to teach the way that kids need them to. And I always have. It's really hard to free and liberate other people when you're not free yourself. So the more free that I can be, the more that I can help others be free. I have to get closer to the goal so I can come back and show others the way. I have to have that space to envision something better than what we have now. So once I decided back in October I was going to take that December sabbatical, I began using any time that I wasn't working to start thinking about what other things I might like or might be interested in that did not involve screen time or the teaching profession. And because, again, I didn't really know what to do with my time, right? Like, work was my hobby. So I started discovering this past fall and into December moss gardening and moss art. And you will hear more about that. I'm actually going to create a whole Instagram account for forest art because I'm so super into it now. More on that another time. I discovered making homemade kombucha, homemade candles, doing puzzles. I got deeper into yoga and hiking. I started painting again. I started wood burning. I started using alcohol inks on tile. And while I was doing all of this, I was listening to audiobooks. I probably listened to at least 20, maybe 30 audiobooks, and who knows how many podcasts during my sabbatical. All nonfiction, mostly on history or politics, social justice, racial justice, capitalism, like all kinds of really, really interesting topics. I will share some of those book titles on my Instagram if you are interested. My handle is angela.watson. I'll share a bunch of those books if you want some recommendations because, oh my gosh, there is some good stuff. But looking back, I realized that a lot of those activities that I was doing in December were things that I had done before, but I just hadn't prioritized time for recently. I was a double major in college, actually. I majored in early childhood education and art. I also had a minor in women's studies. So if that kind of that whole trajectory fits, right? In terms of the type of person that you see today and the types of topics that I'm interested in. So I'd always been interested in art, but my passion for education really just sort of overshadowed everything else and pushed it to the back burner. So in those few short weeks, I feel like I really reconnected to parts of myself that I just hadn't explored very much for a long time. And I learned a lot of new things about myself. I had a lot of new realizations that I'll be sharing over the course of the season of the podcast, things that I think are directly applicable to your life and your work as well. And now that I'm back to work, I continue to prioritize all of those kinds of activities. I try to shut the laptop in the afternoon and then not look at or think about any of it again until morning. Sometimes I can, sometimes I can't, but that is the goal. And that leaves me with the rest of the afternoon and the evening to pursue other interests. I honestly do not have much of a life right now. I'm one of those people who really doesn't leave home for very much beyond just the grocery store due to COVID. So I have the time to pursue hobbies at home. It was just a matter of finding those hobbies and prioritizing them. And I'm not sure that would have happened if I hadn't reached that breaking point. The thing I realized, though, is that a sabbatical is not a guaranteed solution to burnout. It's really easy to think if you just have time off, you will automatically come back refreshed. And that really wasn't the case for me. I mean, to be totally honest, I was not excited to come back online. I actually cried on New Year's Eve because I knew it was my last day, quote, off, and I knew I was going to have to show up in January with something to say to you all. And I still, on December 31st, had no idea what I was going to say. I was feeling more stable and more balanced and more content personally, but I had zero vision at that point of what I could contribute to teachers and kids. But I also knew that more time away from work was not what I needed. I mean, schools are not going to look much different in February or March or April than they do now. So if I'm waiting for the circumstances to get more inspiring, it was going to be a long time until I had anything to say. And I had people depending on me. There's folks on my team, there's you all. If I said it would be a 1-month break, I was determined to find my inspiration again and show back up in that month. So it was a slow process over the course of the month of January. I started mapping out the podcast season. I started working on the February materials for 40 Hour. I started planning out some stuff that I could share on email and social media. And little by little, I found that I did have some things that I wanted to share and some things I wanted to do and stuff that I was excited about. And that might be a little takeaway for you. If you're experiencing a bit of burnout right now, and I think most teachers are, I found that when I reconnect with things I care about, it got me more excited to work, even when those things weren't directly tied to the work. So one of the things that really has me fired up right now that I'm passionate about is the amount of misinformation and harmful propaganda that is being spread online. I think part of why our country is so divided right now is because we have a group of people who are working with alternative facts They are not connected to the reality the rest of us are living in, like the QAnon folks, right? I don't know if I'm considered by those folks to be part of the dreaded mainstream media or not, but I have a platform. My voice is heard by many thousands of teachers. I have the ability to help create the change I want to see in the world. I have the ability to speak truth and facts and reason and science, evidence, real stuff to the people who are listening to me. And that's a powerful way to create ripples of forward progress. So when I thought about that, I used that little spark of inspiration to help push me to take action and ease back into the work. There's a lot of change that I want to see in the world right now. We're starting to head in this new direction now. We have a new administration. What needs to happen next? What's our path forward? When I started thinking about that, I started thinking about, okay, what does that look like in my daily work? Within my sphere of influence, between the things that I can control, between the ideas that I can perpetuate and the types of contributions I can make, what can I do to move toward that world that I want to see? And through that, I found just a little bit of my why for 2021. I don't yet know all the stops on this train, but I know I'm headed in the right direction. And the train is moving down the track now at this point. So this next phase of my work this year involves using my platform to help create the change that I want to see in the world. I will continue to focus on supporting teachers and having the right mindset and staying focused on what's most important to them. I'll talk about teaching self-care, collective self-care, community care, because these are equity issues. When teachers are stressed out, they don't respond to students with empathy and care. If you're not in a good headspace and your working conditions are oppressive, you're just not going to do a great job for kids. So that's one of the main things I'm really passionate about, helping teachers challenge those norms and really think about who they are as people, who they are as they show up in the classroom or show up in the Zoom meeting. Who are you showing up as? And helping teachers be the best version of themselves. I was hoping to come back from my sabbatical with this brand new, very exciting vision that I'd never tapped into before. And I didn't. Not at first. The more I dove into the work, the more I thought of other things I wanted to do. And now that I'm a couple weeks into the work routines again, I'm finding some really good and exciting ideas taking shape. You might not sense a huge difference in topic or tone of the podcast from last season to this one, but there's something inside me that has shifted. And as I shared last week, I'm going to stay focused on the destination and no longer concern myself so much with folks who don't want to board the train. Anyone who has the same vision I do or a similar vision or wants to get there can just come along. If you don't want to, that's fine. Every time I show up online, be it on social media, podcasts, email, whatever, there's a lot of pressure for me to say something new, something original, something earth-shattering. And yes, there are people who expect that. They have let me know personally or via online reviews if they feel shortchanged when I've reused ideas in more than one context or if I've shared things they already know. To keep from running out of things to say, I have to keep growing and learning and evolving, both as a person and as an educator. And that's actually the fun part. The stuff I share with you is a reflection of what I'm thinking and feeling and what's important to me in any given moment. I love bringing you along with what I'm learning and talking about the things that make us better humans, not just better at classroom instruction. Everything you hear from me is written by me. It's from the heart. And I am a human. I have a wide range of feelings and interests. I am not trying to be professional all the time. I'm not trying to be happy and positive and a perpetual encourager of teachers 24/7. I am trying to be real and self-actualized. I really like the person that I have grown into over the years. The world is changing, education's changing, I'm changing too. I'm not the same person I was in 2003 when I started with this, or 2010 or 2015. And the person I'll be a few years from now will be different too. And I hope to like future Angela even more than current Angela as I let go of the expectations that other people place on me and show up more as my authentic self. So if you've been following my work for a while, there's a good chance that the place my head is at won't be the same place as yours during some point in our journey together. Maybe you'll get tired of hearing me harp on work-life balance or productivity, mindset, self-care, and you'll grow frustrated when those topics keep recurring. Or maybe you'll only like the individualistic ideas and be annoyed by some of the more systemic and collective changes that I'm advocating for more now. Or maybe you'll be okay with all those things, but feel like you've already gotten the core message of what you need from me and you're ready to move on and follow other folks online. All of these things are okay. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you or with me. It doesn't mean either of us needs to change a thing. I can't promise to offer exactly what you need, but I can promise to keep showing up, to keep being myself, to keep sharing ideas with anyone who wants to join me in the journey. Have a great week. You can do this. And remember, it's not going to be easy. It's going to be worth it.